welcome to our town hall this evening. We've got an important guest. For all of you that don't know, Glen Motz is the member of Parliament for Medicine Hat. We've been working together now for, I want to say 4 years, 3.5 years. What is it, Glenn?
Going on 4.5, Mark.
Going on 4.5. There you go. I remember meeting you at one of the conventions or rallies or something like that in Calgary or in Edmonton, and there was a blue Dodge Viper in the parking lot, and you and a Dodge Viper are tied forever together in my memory. I don't think the Dodge Viper had anything to do with you per se, but
Nope.
I remember the car and I remember meeting you, and so that was. I think that was actually the one of the leadership debates, one of the early leadership debates when Andrew Scheer became the leader eventually.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's right. What that was. So that's that's going back a little ways. So that's where I met Glen Motz. Since then I've gotten to know him a bunch. He's a former city police officer, City of Medicine Hat police officer.
Yes.
He's got some pretty good stories about being a police officer that I'm sure we'll get into a couple of them maybe tonight, but he's a big dude. Let me tell you that much. Like on the screen, you don't quite get the idea, but he's quite a bit larger man than I am. And I do accuse him all the time of being a bit of a bully, but that's not really true. But I can just I like to give it to him every now and then and just push him around to see if you're able to. But I tell you, he'd take it for so far and then just stops there. The old police officer attitude, it comes out again, and he gets in control of the situation. So it's been a pleasure to get to know Glen over the last few years. And Glen is always, because of his background as a police officer, the law and order stuff that our party works on is typically where you'll find Glen. You've been on Public Safety Committee. Is that where you're on?
Yes, I've been on Public Safety, previously the Associate Shadow for Public Safety, and I'm on Public Safety right now, and Emergency Preparedness. And then I'm also sit on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which is what's the top secret, the highest security clearance committee you can receive in the country, and we are exposed to matters of national security and intelligence matters that we deal with. So I can't tell you about it, Arnold, or I'll have to kill you.
Oh, it's like that, eh? James Bond, eh? So yeah. You were also kind of like a SWAT team guy for a while as well when you were in Medicine Hat.
Yeah, I was part of the tactical arrest control team for about 12 years.
Okay.
And so dealt with lots of different situations. And then as I moved along in my career, I started running it, or became a control officer, or I guess the guy who approves or disapproves of plans with arrest when we have barricaded persons or events where we require the TAC team.
Okay. And then eventually you were like the chief.
No, it was 2IC.
2IC. Okay.
Yeah. I didn't want to be, chief was too political for me. So
okay. Yeah, I'm not, the whole police military world is not something that I'm really familiar with, especially the ranks. We have another member of our caucus, Alex Ruff, and I messed up his rank one day. I called him a corporal, which apparently is the second lowest. There's private and then corporal, and it turns out he's the top. He was at the top of the military.
He was a lieutenant colonel.
Yeah, it doesn't mean much to me, but apparently I screwed that up and deeply offended him. So I'll just leave it at that. Apparently I called you the chief and you weren't the chief either. So
that's okay.
Either way. Glen, you're married, bunch of kids down there in Medicine Hat?
2 children, 6 grandchildren.
Okay, so you got things to protect, and
absolutely
you're used to handling firearms.
Yeah, I grew up on a ranch in south central Alberta. So grew up with firearms my entire life, and I'm a PAL and an RPAL owner. So interestingly enough, I didn't require them through my policing career, and it was only after that I retired in 2015 2016 that I acquired my both BAL and RPAL.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, folks always ask that. It's like when I was advertising this event as well, people are like, "Oh, do you own any firearms, Arnold?" So I am a firearms owner. I don't have a restricted license, but I do have I'm a hunter, so I've got a bunch of hunting rifles and shotguns, 22s. So I do like having firearms. I like things that go boom, I guess. So but yeah, it's for me as well, it's much more of a way of life than something that like I grew up around firearms, so it's not a scary thing. But the a bunch of the folks have been contacting me about this order in council that the government or that the Liberals came out with shortly after the election. Can you tell us a bunch about that?
Well, Cam, there's two things going on. One is the order in council from May 1st that basically prohibited initially about 1,500 firearms that the Liberals, obviously, the people on this call will definitely know if they're involved in the firearms community. They used misleading language to describe a problem where none existed, where we had, military style assault rifles, which there is no such thing in this country. They were politically posturing, pandering to the anti-gun lobby to try and solve a problem by banning firearms that were already banned and prohibited. Now they've banned a whole list of firearms that have never posed a problem. It only affects the licensed firearm owners in this country, the legal firearm owners in this country. And since the ban, Arnold, they've added 450 plus additional firearms to that ban. And what's disconcerting about that is the RCMP firearms classification program, their firearms program, continues to add firearms that are variants of AR-15s and similar firearms. And so what's happened is everybody will know that they basically ban firearms by what they look like rather than what they can do, and that is problematic. There's a lot of things wrong with that whole legislation. And now, in partnership with the Order in Council, the Liberals recently introduced what they call Bill C-21. And C-21 has, some changes to the criminal code, some changes to the Firearms Act, and they've basically brought in some, they call it red flag, yellow flag laws to the airsoft paintball gun bans they've included. They have, included handguns now, allowing municipalities to create a bylaw that will effectively ban handguns in a municipality with the storage and possession of them. And that is problematic. And I'll get into that, I'm sure, with questions down the road. But and there's a number of other provisions in this magazine modifications now. Again, this is political posturing. It's a nonsense piece of legislation, like absolute nonsense. The anti-gun lobby is opposed it because we don't take, the government hasn't taken, they've walked back from the confiscation that they're going to do. They're going to allow people to keep their guns. And the gun, those of us who are gun advocates, those of us who believe in, the legal right to own firearms are against it because the legislation only targets those who are legal firearm owners and those who don't pose a problem. It does nothing for public safety. It does nothing to stop the smuggling of firearms, and it does nothing to target the gang and gun problem we have in our municipalities in our country where criminals are in possession of illegal firearms and use those to put our communities at risk. So it's a nonsense piece of legislation that does nothing but, like I said, political posturing, Arnold.
Yeah. Okay. And order in council, that's like an interesting term. We don't run across it a lot. Is there anything that you would say about that particular, like what is an order in council and why is the government using an order in council rather than coming to the House of Commons, I guess?
Well, I tell you that an order in council in this circumstance is a cowardly way of trying to get in the back door what they knew they would have a huge conflict with trying to get in the front door. you know, it means that cabinet, you know, the just a small group of ministers were able to circumvent in order to get an order in council on firearms. And I'm just trying to remember the section. Is it 217? No, it's not 217. It's one of the sections in the code where they're able to reclassify firearms only if the purpose for which they were designed has changed. And that's how they could get, they tried to get that, you know, around that in the, you know, an order of council. So without parliamentary debate, without anything more than here's 1,500 firearms that we now no longer want the public to have, we're going to now prohibit them. So that not only affected firearm owners who had them in their possession, but it also impacted the whole industry of firearm retailers, manufacturers, and importers in this country. And there are, you know, multi-billions of dollars of firearms now that have basically become worthless.
One of the interesting comments I heard from the prime minister was he said that now that we've banned these firearms, they become completely useless. And I had to chuckle about that. I was like, I don't think the operation of the firearm has changed at all, given that we changed the law, right? Like,
yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, he said a lot of stupid stuff in his lifetime, and certainly the comments that he made around firearms just showed his ignorance. And you know, what's sad is, you know, this legislation on C21, as well as the, you know, the order in council and the words, the inflammatory, misleading language they used around it, you know, it's simple design to confuse the public. You know, the vast majority of the public who do not understand anything to do with firearms. And they fear mongered them in with, you know, in introducing this order in council within weeks of the massacre in Nova Scotia, which, you know, no order in council ban, no C21 was going to stop that for a crazy guy who got his firearms illegally. But yeah, you know, the whole language and the whole, like I said, the words used to describe, you know, firearms designed to kill the greatest number of people in the shortest period of time. It's like those, you know, military grade assault rifles is what they were trying to convince the public that were running rampant in our communities, in our country, have been banned since 1978. You know, you can't make something more illegal that's already illegal, but they did that by adding 1,500. I mean, I stood up at the House of Commons, Arnold. I don't know if you were there or not, and I asked Minister Blair point blank, you know, are there any shotguns on the list? Are there any airsoft on the list? Are there any 22s on the list? Oh, no, this is just the you know, the firearms lobby fear mongering the Canadian public. Well, guess what? We now have dozens of shotguns and 22s, and now the airsoft and paintball industry is at risk because they now are, you know, changed of classifications under C21, puts them also in that category, and it's unfortunate, very unfortunate.
One of the other things that we hear out of the Liberals is that part of their announcement was that where something about like it will now be required to have a license in order to purchase a firearm. How do they get to make that statement? Because as far as I know, you know, when I was 18, I wrote the test, I got my PAL, and then I went to the store and I bought a 30-06 and a scope and some ammo, right? And currently, if I go to the store, my local co-op there, to buy more ammo, they want to see my PAL every time I show up there.
Mm-hmm.
So what were they talking about? Do you have any idea?
Well, I mean, Trudeau didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, if you remember in the order in council, he made a comment that, you know, before you could go acquire a firearm without any license. Well, we know that's not true. You need a license to acquire a firearm in this country. Everybody who is in around this community knows that, and you need a license to be able to show a, you know, retailer that you can buy ammunition. So, I don't, I've stopped trying to guess what the Liberals mean by what they say, because most of it is just a bunch of nonsense.
Mhm. Yeah, like I guess it seemed to me that like there was no requirement, like what they were talking about was there was no requirement to that to be verified. Um, which seemed kind of interesting, given the fact that like every time I've tried to buy a firearm, the folks that have or like bought ammunition, they've always asked, right? So I like while it didn't necessarily say it explicitly, I've never experienced it where they didn't ask, right? Like Canadian Tire, you try to buy your shotgun skeet ammo, and they'd say, "Hey, where's your pal? Let's see your pal." So that like I guess that's where they were at, but it just seems extremely misleading to me to say now finally you have to have a license to purchase firearm or ammo in this country.
Well, and that's part of the misinformation that, and basically the out and out lies that the Liberal Prime Minister and Minister of Public Safety, and you'd think that Minister Blair would know better. I mean, the Prime Minister doesn't know better. He doesn't have a clue at the best of time, and now on firearms, he certainly doesn't know what he's talking about. And Blair, you'd think, would know a lot more, being he was chief of Toronto. But the play on words and this complete and utter misinformation campaign that went into trying to convince the Canadian public, like I said at the front end, Arnold, to try and convince them that we have a problem where none exists.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't have a problem with legal firearm owners in this country, we never have. And law enforcement and Crown prosecutors and courts across this country concur that the Canadian, the legal firearm owners in this country are not and have not and never will be the problem. Like, who else would go through the vigorous process that we do to be approved to have a license to be able to acquire a firearm? I mean, it's a privilege to be able to do that. And then to be subject to scrutiny and having your name checked against the Canadian Police Information System every single day. Like, if there's not a whole lot of employees in this country who would agree to such conditions to be able to have their the questions asked and their domestic partner confirm that it's okay if they have a firearm license and can acquire a firearm. They wouldn't do that as a condition of their employment, and yet for the privilege of having access to a firearm, we do, because we believe that it's okay to do that, because we too want safe communities. But the legislations, both the order C-71, a couple of years previous, and the order in council, and now the C-21, do nothing to improve public safety. Like, absolutely nothing. And across this country, law enforcement, of course, are saying that. Former gang members. I've got a friend who's in Toronto, and Marcel says that they're just laughing at the government because there's, the measures that they're trying to do to stop gang violence will have zero impact on our communities.
Yeah, I think I seen recently, like, the Association of Chiefs of Police have come out against C-21. Is that true?
Well, I think what they've come out against they come out against a lot of things, but they have said that the handgun ban absolutely will have no impact. I mean, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have always been supportive of legislation that stops smuggling and addresses gun violence in our communities. But the Liberals have taken that means they support all of our measures, but they don't. They support the concept of reducing crime and targeting criminals and stopping smuggling. That's what the chiefs of police have spoken to.
So Bill 21, C-21, is like the enactment of the order in council. It legislates a bunch of the firearms that were on that list, but it also brings in a bunch of criminal code amendments as well, if my memory serves me correct. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Well, I'm just going to mention one. So the red flag law, for example.
Okay.
Red flag law.
That's a part of C-21.
C-21. Yep. So currently in I Want to Get To magazine capacity as well, because that's a new change under the code as well.
Okay.
So currently in this country, if you know, an individual believes that someone is a threat to themselves or they're a threat to somebody else, they call law enforcement. Law enforcement does an investigation, and sometimes it's very quick because there's an imminent risk. And law enforcement can do a number of things. So they'll do the investigation, they can go to a judge, they can get an order on our reasonable probable grounds. We call it RPs and Gs. They can get an order to seize a firearm, and then they'll have a hearing and go through the evidence to determine whether that individual should retain a firearm or whatever that looks like. They can also do exigent circumstances where they can actually go and seize a firearm if there's an imminent threat. And they don't need a warrant to do that, but they have to have reasonable probable grounds to act, and they have to ensure that there is a hearing then down the road to determine the best outcome for public safety with the courts. The new red flag law that the Liberals are now introducing is anyone can go to a judge and tell a judge that Arnold is Arnold's a little strange.
Hey.
He has firearms, and he's a threat. You and him may have Arnold and the neighbor may have had a disagreement about something, or they don't like the sound of your motorcycle or whatever. It can be anything. They can go to a judge ex parte. They can go to a judge with no other hearing, with no other accountability, and the judge can doesn't have anybody else there to do an investigation. It's one person without the other person there, then says, well, this guy's a threat to me, or somebody else is a threat to themselves, and the judge can order the seizure of firearms. Now, of course, the police have to go then, and they have a warrant to go and seize a firearm. But it's wrought with problems when you look at that. If you step back and have a look at that, it sounds really good on its surface, but I mean it's wrought with the potential for people to be vindictive, to make false accusations, to not understand, and it also puts police at risk because they haven't gone and done the investigation in the first place like they would normally do to determine whether or not there's grounds to justify taking a firearm away. So there are some concerns with what that looks like. Now the other one I just want to get to, is magazine cartridges. Like right now in this country, you can't. It's a prohibited device that you have to have a magazine that is no larger than 5 rounds. And now I think under the new legislation, magazine capacity, what do they call it? There's a name that they call it. I just want to make sure I find it. So the current law, it's a prohibited device now, as I said. The new law creates an additional offense for altering a capacity. So I mean, really, when you look at this, it's a lie by omission. Really, I mean, that's what it is. It's a lie by omission. They are pretending to prohibit something that's already illegal in Canada, right? You can't have a magazine. You can't alter a magazine. You can't be in the possession of a magazine that's the capacity to have more than 5 rounds. So the fact that they are now going to allow for altering a magazine is a play on words again. You can't, if you alter it and you're in possession of it, it's the same sort of an offense. So that's the sort of stuff that's in this thing, in this legislation, and it's illegal to have a magazine of this capacity. The other thing is that the municipal firearm or handgun ban. I like just think about that. I think this will be. I personally think it's unconstitutional. We are going to have municipalities have the potential to enact a bylaw, but that bylaw has criminal sanctions attached to it. So think about this. You are traveling from St. Albert to Sherwood Park, and you're traveling across, and you're going to a gun club, and you are allowed to carry your firearm from where you live to the gun club you want to go to, your handgun, but you have to drive through Edmonton. And let's just say Edmonton decides to institute a handgun ban. Well, what isn't illegal in St. Albert, but it isn't illegal in Sherwood Park, is illegal if you drive through Edmonton. So you've really allowed municipalities to institute bylaws that have criminal sanctions, because C21 says that we're going to tie your license to you breaching a bylaw for transportation and storage of handguns. I think it's unconstitutional. There's a reason the federal government is responsible for criminal law, and that again is wrought with serious problems.
Yeah. So C21, as far as I understand it, is like kind of targets like law-abiding gun owners. So it's like folks that already have a license and everything like that, but are now in possession of a firearm that's on their prohibited list.
Not necessarily. Okay. It doesn't have to be a prohibited list. I mean, it can be, okay, but it can be anything. It can be like now we have a magazine. Now we have handguns that could be prohibited. Airsoft firearms. So it has a whole regime of things.
Basically, C21 affects, like, could have the possibility of turning people into criminals that were formerly law-abiding gun owners.
Absolutely.
That's C21. Contrast that with C22. Most folks on this call probably aren't familiar with C22. C22 is a criminal code amendment, and it's being brought out as a way to reduce the number of folks in prison. And interestingly, like the actual crimes that are committed with firearms, they're reducing the sentencing for.
Yeah, well, yeah. So C21, for example, is going to increase, I think, 2 offenses. First of all, Liberals are against mandatory minimums, and yet in C21 they are going to increase the mandatory minimums, I believe, for smuggling and one other one. But in C22, which is the Justice Reform Bill, they are going to reduce the penalties for crimes for unauthorized possession of a firearm is going to be reduced. Mm-hmm. Possession of a prohibited firearm is going to be reduced. Possession of a weapon obtained by crime is going to be, so you break in and steal a firearm. Weapons trafficking, the sentences are going to be reduced. Reckless discharge of a firearm will be reduced. Discharge of a firearm with intent to wound or endanger a person, and robbery with a firearm. All of these offenses, I mean, it's like we have a gun problem in this country, and yet we are going to reduce the sentences for those who commit crimes with these firearms. It makes no sense. Arnold, just as a side note, a few years back, I did a TV program out of Ontario, and it was called Political Blind Date. And I took a Liberal MP. I brought him out here. I took him to a gun instructor. Wanted to give him some. Here's the training you required in order to have a firearm. We then went to a gun range, and the Liberal MP refused to touch any of the firearms. Then we went to his community. We went to Centre Toronto. And we went to Lawrence Heights. Big project. In the Centre Toronto, and then we went to another neighborhood where this was in the fall, and this was in May of that same year. This mom had 2 of her daughters shot in a playground in a gang shooting. Now, thankfully, the 2 girls survived, but they will be physically and emotionally scarred for life. Now, this did not end up on the final cut of the program, but I asked this mom, I said, okay, you're talking to 2 members of parliament, legislators. If you had your way, what needs to be done when we approach firearm legislation to ensure that we try to keep our communities safe? And she says, well, criminals aren't afraid of the law. There's no teeth to it. You have to make them afraid. So those who use firearms in the commission offense have to be held to a higher standard, higher account. And so I thought it was, most appropriate that a mom had her, who knows this and lives gang violence in her neighborhood, basically on a weekly basis, has this to say.
That somewhat it's interesting, just the urban rural divide around firearms. It seems that the Liberals wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't advantageous for them politically. Is that how do we bridge that divide, I suppose?
Sorry, do you want to run that past me? I think I missed the front part of that.
Oh, okay. Just talking about, like, the Liberals are doing this for a reason. They think that this is going to help them win. And you seen that, right, with on your political blind date that you went on. The fear around firearms maybe is in that particular case. And this guy coming from Toronto and you coming from Alberta, what's the difference, and how do we as firearm owners, how do we reach out to our neighbors who are a little more queasy about it or don't understand? Tough question.
Well, I think it's fair to say that I think the biggest gap that exists right now with people believing what the Liberals tell them is that they don't know. So as firearms owners, as people who have influence in your communities, that if you have opportunity to set the record straight, to give them facts, to be respectful, the last thing that needs to happen with the firearms community is people who are out being, I'll use the word, more radical in their positions. I think on social media, on your sphere of influence is to help educate the public, bring members of the public to your gun club. I always found, and I heard all sorts of stories from people who get so much educational value out of going to a gun club with a friend of theirs, and they learn about firearm safety, and some of them become very involved in that community. So we can do a lot of things, and I think it's important that we all have a role to play. And I think many times I noticed with C-71 when that came out, Arnold, that the firearms community thought it was entirely up to the politicians to do everything, and I started pushing back over the course of that, saying, no. There's a bigger game at play here that people just need to understand and be aware of, and that is that I don't know what the Liberals are really trying to do, and so I by myself do not have near the pull nor the influence than if everybody gets involved and everybody speaks their concern and everybody shares, and can say, no, firearm ownership in this country is a privilege. The information that you're sharing is wrong, and we need to stand up and be listened to and be heard and have a voice in that. I mean, some people would suggest that, is it possible that through attrition, through the Ordnance Council C-71 and now C-21, through attrition, the Liberal plan is really to say, so Arnold, you have firearm X, it's now prohibited, and not only prohibited, but it's illegal for you to have it. We are now going to take it back. If you don't want to give it back, it's okay. You can keep it, but you can't remove it from your gun safe. You can't do anything with it. You can't sell it, and you can't bequeath it to anybody. So in effect, and however long you live, that firearm is now out of the picture. Yeah. Well, is that really what's going on here? I mean, and it's possible they're going to take guns by attrition. That's kind of how it's gone since I've been, I've only been in here since the fall of 2016, and I'm seeing that slow erosion of certain components of our society, and firearm ownership is certainly part of it. But they have no evidence to support what they're doing. Like when you ask for evidence, there is none. They have no evidence to support that the Canadian firearm community, the legal firearm owners in this country, are a risk or ever have been a risk to our communities. But they and that's why they have to resort to misinformation and fear campaigns.
But don't worry, they continually tell us that they are the data-driven scientific government, Yeah.
Yeah, we know that's not true.
Yeah. Just before we open up to questions and from the folks that have joined us this evening, you sit on the Public Safety Committee. I imagine firearms isn't the only thing that comes up there.
No.
So it's probably been a place of a lot of controversy lately.
Well, we have a few things, Arnold. We've got the systemic racism within the RCMP. That study went on last year, and the report's being looked at now. Tomorrow we have a special committee Conservative MPs through 1086, I believe, or 1064 of the procedures in the House of Commons asked for a special emergency meeting. And we are going to be dealing with Minister Blair, Minister Hajdu, and some officials from CBSA, RCMP, Public Health, the PHAC group, about the hotel quarantines and the lack of safety, the sexual assaults, and those sort of issues going on there. And so that will be a very interesting conversation. And there's the parole issues with a young lady in Quebec who was killed. And there's a number of other studies that are being undertaken, and so it's there's never any end for matters of great importance for the public safety.
Yeah, the one thing that since COVID's come around that doesn't come up very much anymore in the media, but I'm sure is still an issue, is the Roxham Road border crossing. That would be something that your committee deals with as well?
It did. It's not as prominent now.
Okay.
Pierre-Paul Hoos is one of our Quebec Conservative MPs, and he was on that issue a lot, where the border crossing was used as a alternative to, as a loophole, the safe third country loophole, and we had thousands of people enter our country in such a manner.
Okay. Glenn, your video is frozen on my screen. I don't know how. If mine's doing the same, but I don't know if you turn your camera back on and off again. Maybe that'll.
I'll try it. I noticed my video was freezing a few times throughout this, so I apologize for that. I find that the Ottawa should have good internet, but it doesn't always.
I tell folks that all the time. I say, hey, you know what? We've got the House of Commons Zoom platform here, and we still don't seem to be able to get organized. All right. Now you're just black.
I'm sorry.
Black square.
Yeah, I don't. There's nothing much I can do except sign out and come back in again. I'm on Wi-Fi, so I don't know why it's doing that.
Okay. Do you want to try that?
I can. Yeah, absolutely. I can sign out and come back in. Let me try that.
All right.
You can hold.
Oh, now I'm all by myself here. Well, we'll be hopefully Glenn's right back, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So I see that there's a number of you have written me questions. That's great. There's a couple of questions on the Facebook Live that hopefully we can get to those as well. But if you want to ask a question live, just raise your hand using the raise hand function. The raise hand function should be down across the bottom of your screen. Sometimes it's also in there'll be a button on the bottom that says the reactions as well. So if you want to get queued up for that as well, if you want to ask a question of myself and Glenn, just raise your hand at any time, and I'll put you down and get a speaking order started for sure. So Glenn, you're back and you're moving again. So not frozen. It's not even that cold here. So I don't know how you got frozen, but yeah. Still can't hear you though.
I just got to open up my. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, and you're moving again. You're not frozen, so
Perfect.
very good. Yeah, we were just talking about Roxham Road there. That was any other issues that come up at public safety that you'd like to let folks know about?
I don't know. I would. There's so much on the go right now. I'm just trying to remember the studies. Maybe Sean, he'll remember the. I'm just focusing on the one for tomorrow. I've been studying it, preparing for it on the hotel quarantine stuff. Maybe Sean remembers some of the studies that we have, some of the issues we got coming up.
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure, please.
So we have a study pending on gang violence and gun smuggling. We have one pending on foreign interference and influence in Canada. We have one related to ongoing on the parole board study. We have two proposed studies on border security measures related to COVID specifically and broader as well. We have a briefing coming up on terrorism listing of organizations and a couple of potential studies on extremists and terrorist influencing in Canada.
So there you go, folks. Glen is, those are a bunch of the topics that Glen deals with on a weekly basis over at the Public Safety Committee. So if you got a question on those issues, as well as the firearms regime here in Canada, Glen is our guest here this evening, and we'd be happy to answer your questions for the next few minutes. We got about 15, 20 minutes left in the Zoom call tonight. Gayleen has her hand up, but she's had her hand up the entire time. Gayleen, if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself there and you can ask your question. Other than that, I'll just read off the top question that I got here from Zach. Zach, he says, Glen, MP Pam Damoff recently made a motion at SECU to condemn the NFA for so-called using dangerous language that was used on our NFA talk show that she said could incite a violent mob to storm Parliament. What do you think of Pam's actions?
Suffice to say that I think we need to ensure that there's no place for any sort of violence or any of those actions in our communities at all, or the incitement of any of those. However, people are hypersensitive right now, and they're even more so with the frustrations brought on by this pandemic. So we all, I think, are in a position where we need to be careful on what we say, how we say it, and how others who might be less tolerant to any sort of different schools of thought might perceive these sort of things. It was a conversation at, it was a conversation that was had at the Public Safety Committee. She brought this motion up. I don't know what her motivation was. Don't know whether there was, we asked whether there was an investigation or a complaint laid or anything like that. Was there any threats made to anyone specifically? And I don't know her motivation. I think it's just important to, for all of us as firearm owners and those who advocate for our community, to be very responsible for what we say and how it could be misconstrued by others. And, the best or worst representatives of us as firearm owners are us. And we can be really good at it, or we can cause people to question us ourselves and therefore discredit ourselves. And I think every opportunity we have to be responsible at that high level is something we should be doing. And so I've wondered many times a lot of what the motivations are behind some some liberal things that they do. I don't understand this one completely. And again, I think it was another attempt to try and change the channel or discredit the firearms community with, more rhetoric. And again, people's impression of, whether they feel threatened or is their own, that's a perception that they have, and those perceptions are their own reality. So we just have to be mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just say that my own experience with Pam is that reality isn't necessarily something that she deals in extensively. Often she pulls things out of context, and like I've been on the receiving end of some of her bluster as well. And so she will take a comment or a suggestion or a kind of a joking remark and blow it out of context and use it against her political opponents. And I would say the NFA would definitely be, she would consider her political opponent. It's always whatever she's up to is something that we have to deal with and answer to, but she is definitely a political actor if there are any, and she understands her role, and I hope that the NFA understands their role as well. So the second question I got from Troy, basically saying like guns don't kill people, as you know. What's the next ban? Baseball bats or kitchen knives? I think that's probably a more rhetorical question, but Glenn, it's all yours.
Well, it's interesting. Like we've said before, that this is this whole legislation, C-21, the OIC, and C-71 a couple of years back, which, by the way, they haven't enacted yet, which is a surprise. It's firearms are dangerous if they are improperly handled. A lot of things are. And it doesn't matter the type of firearm, every firearm has that potential. So that's why
much like a baseball bat or a kitchen
exactly
knife.
That's why much vigor goes into ensuring that those who are able to have a firearm, to be legally able to acquire a firearm, go through a training course, go through a process whereby they have the skills to be able to handle a firearm, to understand the mechanism and the risks and the danger around it, and to be responsible with it, because it is a privilege to have a firearm and to have a firearms license and own a firearm. That's the reality that we go through. Plus, we have to go through the vigor of ensuring that we have the background and the ability to to legally and lawfully own one. So we have to meet a certain standard from a public safety perspective. And we all agree to that because it's reasonable, because of the potential that can be done with a firearm in the wrong hands. Wrong hands being either those who are untrained or those who are criminal.
Mm-hmm. We got another question from a fella, or maybe not a fella, maybe a gal. Anonymous attendee is who's from. What is going to prevent swatting? And so I think that's probably in light of C-21.
Yes.
Where like
swatting is a term that has come in recent years, usually out of the US, or it started, where people would make a complaint about alleging certain offense in a certain location, and the SWAT teams would be called in to try and manage it, and turns out there'd be nothing to it. The same sort of the same sort of risk can occur here with respect to the red flag law. You can have a disgruntled neighbor, you can have a relationship gone awry, you can have all sorts of things that can occur that that may force, that may report an incident as being violent or volatile when no such thing occurs, and the TAC team, the SWAT teams, then respond to keep public peace and to protect, for safety of the person involved, the accused, and officers. That's called swatting. And so C21 will not prevent that. It would, in fact, it has the potential to create that as a greater challenge. And that's one of the things that people who are against this legislation see as being one of its many flaws.
Mhm. The next question, many people as well as municipalities and organizations have written our MPs and various ministers and the Prime Minister to condemn the firearm ban, but it seems to fall on deaf ears within the Liberal Party. What can we do to get the public do to get moving and amend so that these laws direct towards actual criminals committing crimes with illegal firearms?
A great question, and I'll give you a very simple answer. It's a complex process, but it's the only way I see changing the ideological drift that this government is demonstrating is a change in government. They have support from either the Bloc or the NDP in a lot of their policies, including C71, including the OIC, including C21. I suspect it's clear whenever C21 comes up, they'll have support from one of those other parties. The only way we can change that is to, for the Conservatives to form a majority government and ensure that we, deal responsibly with firearm ownership, which, by revoking, or not revoking, by the word escapes me, by appealing or repealing these legislations that only serve to harm the legal firearm community, and then focus the resources that could be wasted in such a thing as the order in council or this the buyback or the confiscation plan, and focus those resources on keeping young people out of gang life by focusing on smuggling, mental health issues, law enforcement, courts, some of our labs to make sure that those who commit crimes, the crime labs can properly assess the evidence that they collect, so that cases can be properly adjudicated. All those sort of things can happen, and it doesn't happen with the current approach to soft on crime. It does with the current approach to criminals aren't held accountable, and they're being ignored with all legislations to do with firearms, and it's the law-abiding ownership. To me, that's lazy government. It's lazy to go after people who are not the problem. It takes work and commitment to go after those who are going to who continue to be opposed to problem in our communities.
Just trying to find another question here. Oh, here's a good one. If you hadn't noticed, the libs want to control the media in all the ways, the mainstream media, non-mainstream media, because of the $600 million bribe just wasn't enough. RE Bill C10. So I don't think C10 is going to make it over to Public Safety Committee, but I might be wrong. But Glenn probably has a few things to say about the big media bailout anyways.
Well, I do know that anytime that we're using public funds to support media that otherwise can't manage to support themselves, it becomes a problem. And media, to me, media has a critical role to play in a democratic society, where they gather information and allow the public to make assessments based on gathering all the information. Unfortunately, as I have said, and all of us, I'm sure, if we are open to it, would recognize that the media has become more of an opinion piece. Is they will describe for us how we should think, and they will leave information out that's critical to make informed decisions or informed opinions about things. And that to me isn't journalism. Journalism is about finding facts, sharing those facts, and letting people arrive at the conclusion based on the facts that are presented. And that we have a bias now. And one of the challenges we have as conservatives is that we not only, the Liberals seem to be able to, the media will always, they'll message everything the Liberals are doing, and the Liberals don't have to worry about it, because the media will do all their heavy lifting and carry all the water for them when it comes to letting the public know what's going on. Well, if the Conservatives, the only time the media really seems to pay attention to the Conservatives, if they think there can be some discreditation coming toward a member of the Conservative Party, or they can sow some discord, seems to be the only time that a number of the mainstream media, seem to demonstrate, and it's unfortunate. You should be able to trust your news sources, and nowadays, I'm hearing overwhelmingly from my constituency that, most people don't believe what they see in the media, and good for them. They shouldn't.
All right, so we got a bunch more comments around the media that seemed to spark a bunch of things. Yeah, we didn't, when we were younger, the media could be trusted. Don't know exactly when it started to erode. Yeah, all right. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. I just want to thank Glen for spending a big chunk of his evening tonight with us. The folks from Northern Alberta appreciate it. I like to call Northern Alberta the promised land. I don't know if you know this, Glen, but the honey capital of Canada is the little town called Falher, Alberta. And we also have 7,500 dairy animals in Northern Alberta. So it's literally flowing with milk and honey. So when I call it the promised land, I got proof, So come up and check us out sometime. It's not quite as windy as Medicine Hat, so I'm afraid we'll disappoint you there. But well, other than that, we've got probably everything Medicine Hat has and more.
Well, except sunshine.
It's sunny too where we come from. Don't worry.
Well, Medicine Hat's the sunniest place in Canada.
Oh, well, we're the sweetest honey capital.
There you go.
Yeah, you never want to get two MPs arguing about whose riding is better, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Arnold, it's been a pleasure as always. I always enjoy visiting with the firearms community. They are the most knowledgeable about many things, certainly about firearms. It's a distinct honor to serve Canadians and do the things that the fights that I get to fight against Liberals and believe, and believe in the things that common, ordinary people of this country believe are important. And it's a great honor to be able to advocate on behalf of the people here. And we always appreciate receiving, information and support and suggestions on areas and issues on legislation that it can have impact. And so again, I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate the tolerance of your audience to be here this evening. So thank you very much.
All right, and folks, all of this wouldn't happen if it weren't for important staff that back us up. So we got tonight we have Sean from Glen's office on the call as well, and then Dale and Amelia from my office. They're making sure that the Zoom link's working properly and bringing people in and out of the conversation here. So I really do appreciate their help as well. And I want to thank everyone for joining us from Fox Creek to Fort Vermilion and all points in between. I do really appreciate you taking some time to join us this evening as well. So with that, I want to wish you all good night.